What's up, fight fans? Welcome to my channel. This is Johnny, and in today's video I sit down with professional boxer out of Perth, Australia, Action Jackson, England. He shared the ring with Australia's greatest talent. He's also beaten world champions such as Jermell Herring before, and he's coming off a victory 2 weeks ago in New Zealand. And guys, if you could do this for me, follow Jackson England. I'll leave all of his social media links in the description below. Enjoy. Your biography says that you're from Penrith, but now you live out in Perth. How'd that happen?
That came about with my mum and my stepdad. My stepdad was working over here doing FIFO work. So when you're in Western Sydney or in Penrith as we were, I think my parents and us as kids, it was good for a change. So it wasn't really a set known thing like, oh, we're going to come to Perth and we're going to end up living here and staying here. But once we come here, it was really for work for him and also for a change for us. And we fell in love with the place. Like, even though it's quite isolated here, I can't rave on about how much I love Perth. It
wasn't like a situation to go to like a better fight gym. You were raised out there as a kid.
Raised out in Western Sydney first, growing up in the suburbs of Penrith, and then come out to Perth and basically did a lot of my schooling over here, a lot of my stuff over here, and then I didn't find boxing until I was about 14. Like, boxing has always been a part of my life, and from my biological father, from all the family there. But it wasn't until I came to Perth, and then a couple of years went by, and then it was actually my stepdad who gave me the choice. He actually said, "What do you want to be? What do you want to do?" And that's where boxing found me, in a sense, as well. I made that decision, and I was like, you know what, I want to become world champion. So from 14 years old onwards, that's where the journey started.
It's an amazing opportunity from a mentor's perspective. Your stepfather, who gave you that opening to converse about your goals and your future. And I think that is a very important component that some young people, younger kids, they don't get that opportunity. And for you to be so clear and level-headed as a 14-year-old, to have no doubt and how to identify that goal, where did that come from?
It was actually the ultimatum that he gave me, because I was always, very active. I always had that love for combat sports, whether it be Bruce Lee, any sort of like old school Chuck Norris movies, anything like that. I love my martial arts. I loved everything like that. But I also love music and dance. So it was tying up between, do I want to perform and dance, or do I want to perform and fight? So when he gave me that ultimatum, he said to me and my sister, he said, I want you guys to have a good think about what you guys want to do. You've got one life, you've got one shot, and you either want to live your everyday life, and there's nothing wrong with that, going 9 to 5, doing what you want to do, but you want to expect more from yourself, and you want that for your kids. You want them to chase their dreams and do whatever makes them happy. So I got that option, so did my sister, and I went away on a school camp, came back, and I said, I want to fight. And the very next day it started from there, basically.
What is tent boxing? I read somewhere that, was it your grandfather? He was back in the day and doing, is that like at circuses or at festivals, or what's that about?
It's basically like the festival. So the traveling tent boxing would be like all around Australia. So it's like very much in that gypsy aspect of things, where, you'd have haystacks, or you'd have a ring, and it'd either be bare knuckle or it'd be gloved fighting. So like it'd be sanctioned or unsanctioned. My grandfather fought it would have been the 60s or 70s. Yeah. And all the family kind of originate with there. So like I've got my manager and my uncle Noel Thornbury, and his brother Ricky Thornbury, and their father Trevor, who fought in the tents and and as a professional fighter as well. And then I've got my grandfather, which is Errol McIver. He fought in the tents then, so that's where I refer to it back then. But it's amazing how they lived their lives back then, traveling from place to place and park to park, and basically fighting was just part of their lives, part of the things, where I wasn't really forced into that. I made that choice on my own.
When I was 14 years old, I grew up in Northeast Ohio, and all my buddies were basketball players, football players. Those are the sports I played. And we're at this under 18 nightclub, and a girl comes up to me and she asks me to dance. And at the time, as a 14-year-old, I didn't know how to dance. And I said no. And I got made fun of by my boys, as your mates will do. And then I remember the next day I asked my best friend Matt, who knew how to dance, to teach me. and he ended up teaching me. We ended up watching. I'm older than you. We would end up watching Usher and like the "You Make Me Wanna" video, and that's how I learned to dance. And then dancing has always been a big part of what entertainment, freedom, expression. How did you get into dance?
I idolized Michael Jackson, Prince, George Michael, even like the old school. I'm very big on the old school street dance, urban hip hop and stuff. So like the old 80s movies with breaking. So like if you go down the history there, you got like Shabba-Doo, you got Shaka Khan, you got like all that, Boogaloo Shrimp, all these people, these massive dance names, Pop and Taco, the list goes on. I just love dance and expression anyway. But with a lot of those things, like Michael Jackson was a phenomenon to me. Even still to this day, there's not a day that goes by where I don't preach his music and preach what he was, and that was a massive influence for me. So that's why when I go out and I fight, I walk out to Michael Jackson songs, or I train with that sort of stuff and that sort of music and era, But as a young kid, dancing was basically just always there. My dad danced and fought at the same time. My mum danced. The music, the family was very musically orientated as well. So yeah, it just, as growing up, it was just very much there. And then fighting also was as well.
How do you feel that now, knowing boxing, I've trained since I was 7, for somebody who might be unindoctrinated about it, talk about the balance, what dancing provides to your skill set and your boxing style now as a world-ranked pro fighter. Do you feel that if you didn't have that background, you'd be the same guy in the ring?
I think natural ability takes a big toll. Has a big flow on when it comes to any sport. It doesn't have to be boxing; it can be anything. But natural ability, there's always that conversation between, you either have unbelievable talent but no hard work. Like you can't have all that talent in the world and then mix it with hard work. But it all takes the right circumstances and the right people to be able to do that. You got to have a good balance of natural ability and work ethic. And I think if I wasn't to have that natural ability of rhythm and timing and dance, especially in the type of style, the way I fight, I don't think I would personally be the same fighter, because you can see a difference between natural rhythm and unnatural rhythm. So almost like choreographed, rehearsed rhythm, different from your Sugar Ray Leonards, your Roberto Durans, you've all the great fighters that are phenomenal movers. There's those little extra pieces to the puzzle that aren't there when it has to be taught or it's natural.
So we know that you just fought a few weeks back, Beauchamp, and then if we were to rewind your last few fights, you had some huge fights. I mean, you fought Jamel Herring, world champion, and then you had the Liam Wilson fight. I wanted to ask you something that I couldn't find anywhere, is that in terms of managing the career when you're taking fights, it's kind of a loaded question, because when I look at your resume, I see the only guy ranked above you in Australia is Liam, and that was a hell of a dogfight. I mean, one of the judges gave it to you. I don't want to be biased because you're sitting here with me, but I thought you did a hell of a job in that fight. That fight was one of my favorites of the year. And then you fight Herring, and then you fight Beauchamp. Now, is it hard for you to find fights, because you've been on Tim Tszyu undercards, you've headlined events against world champions, and then you fight? What was that Beauchamp fight experience like, your last fight? And talk a little bit about, to the people, maybe the pros and cons of trying to find fights, where you are in your career as a 26-year-old with, this ascension going like that.
I'm grateful for every opportunity I've had, on the stages I've been able to perform on and showcase myself. Because, this end goal is to become world champion and to be in the history books and to, leave a legacy, not just for myself, but for my 2 sons. And what I think the hard thing about it is I've struggled with it a fair bit in my career personally, is, I'm here ready to fight. As soon as I jumped off the plane back from the Beauchamp fight, same with the Jamel fight, I only have a day or 2 off and I'm straight back into training. I live in the gym. I don't ever take that time out. So I trained this morning and I'm probably going to train after this as well. I love boxing so much, regardless whether it loves me back. I think when it comes to fighting, going from the Jamel fight then to Nort Beauchamp, and that's not saying anything towards Nort. Nort's been in there with great fighters and he's put himself up there against good fighters, and he's phenomenally tough as well. I think it's almost a struggle to be able to find specific fights at the right time. I think it's all about timing. Thought I'd step in the ring with Jamel Herring. Like, to have that opportunity, I was over the moon. Like, 2 years prior, I was watching him be the world champion and the number one in the division. And then 2 years later, I'm getting my phone ringing saying that, oh, here's an opportunity to fight Jamel Herring. And I jumped at that opportunity. And even when we were trying to get the fight after that, it was like, okay, we're going to fight someone in the top 10 to the top 6 or 5. Are we going to have an active fight, stay busy until we get the fights that we want to build to in the top 5 or top 6, or do we get a world title fight call? And that, I think that's all it is. And my management, again, who's my uncle, like he's absolutely amazing at what he does. You know, he also looks after David Naika, the bronze medalist from New Zealand, looks after Alex Leopold Jr. And I think I at the end of the day, a fighter's fight. Mm-hmm. If I got called tomorrow to say you're fighting Oscar Valdez, I'm not going to say no. You know, like, and that's anybody as well. But at the same time, it's having the right person to be able to show where the right fights are and build the right way as well. You know, you got to think smart at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, you're early in your career, you lost a close split. You lost that Paul Fleming fight. When I put on my Instagram story that I was talking to you today, I got a lot of questions. I asked, what would you ask, Jackson England? And one of my buddies, Jackson Stanley, I'm gonna feature his question. Do you know Jackson?
Yeah.
He's a good kid, and he wanted me to ask you through this modality the lessons you might have learned through that Fleming fight. And guys who are watching this from America, because a lot of the people who are going to be tuning in on the YouTube channel, a big base of the following is from America. It's where I grew up. Australia's filled with savages. This is what a lot of people don't understand. It was one of the biggest things that I had to learn when I moved here, is the fight culture, especially when it's so isolated as a country. There's a lot of world champion talent that will just eat each other before they make it out of Australia. And the kid you fought, Fleming, is one of those. And Jackson wanted me to ask you, what did you learn through that experience? And did you take any positives away, even though on your record it was a loss?
Looking at it from there, I take every fight as a positive. I'm my biggest critic, only because I look at, the positives, the negatives, I look at everything. But at the end of the day, if something goes on me, I keep it on me. If something goes on someone else, I'll even take their blame and I'll put it on myself as well. Because at the end of the day, the fighter's the one who's doing the job. You got to make sure you have the right people around you. I think how I look at the Paul Fleming fight, I was looking at that fight for ages, and the management I had at the time, which was an older management, they kept brushing me aside. They wanted me to do things that were catering for them, not for my career. And me being young, I just did what I was told. I didn't have a full understanding. I was just being told, I've got to stay in Perth. I've got to be isolated here. I can't spread myself out to other places, other things. But really, they wanted me to stay here. And then when the Paul Fleming fight come up, I was again over the moon, because I even mentioned previous to that I would love to fight Paul Fleming. I'd love to fight with Liam Wilson. I'd love to fight all these big names. And I felt regardless of deserving or not, the whole thing is to, you want to be the best, you got to fight the best. And I've got no disrespect towards anybody. At the end of the day, we jump in there, we fight, we can be friends before and after, I don't care. And the thing about Paul, that fight particularly, the biggest positive I take out of that is that it was my breakout fight. So being isolated as long as I was, and being held under the management I was at the time, and I didn't get the exposure that people were telling me I should have had, that fight gave me that. And for us to be on the card that, we were on and be televised under Sonny Bill Williams and Barry Hall, we should have been main event, because the fight we brought was world class. It was back and forth for a solid 10 rounds, and it was a fight personally, I believe I edged, I believe I won. But regardless of how I look at that, it's a massive lesson in knowing myself that, I belong there. And that it also gave me the positive reinforcement, knowing that that not only I belong there, but I can mix it with guys that have got miles above experience than what I ever had. I only ever had 22 amateur fights, and Paul's been an Olympian. He's had hundreds of odd fights, and I myself, only the 22 amateur experience, and I've had a lot more experience building from those fights and sparring in the gym than I have in my amateurs whatsoever.
Speaking on the confidence gained and earned through life experience, share a little bit about what it's been like working with George Kambosos Jr.
George is the man. I got to thank George so much, because even when after that fight, George was commentating the Fleming fight, and even I got to chat to George before the weigh-in day, and didn't really get to talk personally with George, but it was just a little bit of small talk here and there. And then it was after the Fleming fight where George's dad, Jim, approached me after the fight, and he was just rapt for me. He was like, "Mate, you're incredible! Like, what a phenomenal fight!" And also being able to come back to my first home, Sydney, and be able to fight in front of friends and family, like that was amazing as well. And then it was when George fought Haney the first time, I requested from my old management, I'll go and help be a sparring partner, do whatever and never heard anything back. And then I reached out myself for his preparation for the second fight. I reached out and I said about being a sparring partner, helping out, and then we organised it through there. And then building that relationship with George and seeing his world-class ability. And I remember the first session, like the first spar we did, sharing the ring with him, he's got that aura about himself, where he is that world-class level. And, he's mixed it with the guys in America, Mickey Bay, Lee Selby, and then, looking at the last fight, Lomachenko, sharing the ring with someone like Vasil Lomachenko is phenomenal. So being in the ring with him, that feeling of, this is a world-class fighter here, this is a world champion, this is someone who's undisputed, who's done the biggest thing, one of the biggest things in Australian boxing, or history of boxing.
My next question was going to be why I wanted to segue George, because he's one of my favorite fighters, not just in Australia. He was Pacquiao's training or sparring partner. George went abroad. I was living in Vegas from 2011 to 2013, and I knew who George Kambosos was. And when I got down here, I was kind of, I don't know the correct adjective to say. It was kind of shocking to me that he wasn't getting the recognition that I thought that he earned. And when I saw that you had worked with him and that his pops, who's a great guy, reached out to you and you had trained with him, it made sense, because when you mix it up and you get that experience in the ring with a guy, like you said, you could tell he had that aura about him. That has to give you such confidence when you sign on the dotted line, or when you go up against these Jamel Herrings of the world, or maybe potentially Navarrete or Oscar Valdez. You know that you would mix it up with George and you could hang in there with anyone. And I think some fighters don't have that opportunity to feel that certain way.
No, not at all. And for anybody who even can jump in there with guys that are at that caliber, it builds on your own, not only confidence, but builds on your ability as well, and what you take out of the spar as well, from conditioning to boxing prowess to so much, when you mix it with the best, you end up building on that level as well, because if you're constantly having sparring sessions or working with people who are not at that level, or on that level where you're not looking to go to the next, you're going to stay there. Where they say all the time, boxing's all about levels, and I got to see that first time, not only from the Fleming fight, I built from that level. And then as soon as I jumped in and was sparring George, I went to the next level. So it's very visible to see those levels.
I was just speaking to a 17-year-old, nearly, he just turned pro, and his father's managing his career. And you're a father. You're only 26, man. You're still a young kid, but you're a father. And my question derives from, are you making all those decisions behind the scenes of who to jump in the ring with, to spar with? Maybe you're going to gyms that you don't know the guys. How is that decision-making process made to make sure and ensure that your livelihood is the key priority?
It's all on me. And I've got my biggest confidence in myself. So even if it's, there's a lot of great talent here in Perth, well, great amateurs. We got, I've got a good friend of mine named Jagger who fights at 140. So I jump in there and I spar him all the time. There's a lot of other pros that I move around with here in Perth as well. But just guys that mix and match it. And I like sparring the heavier guys personally. I find, because I'm quite a strong
5'8", right?
Pardon?
You're 5'8", 5'9".
5'8".
5'8", and
5'8".
you're fighting a super feather, 130 pounds for all the Americans out here.
Yes,
What do you walk around at?
I only walk around, what's the equivalent to, I walk around I walk around at 140.
Because really? So you're not cutting a lot of weight?
No, to our equivalent, I'm only cutting maybe 3 or 4 kilos.
And when I look at fighters and athletes, I always admire the ones whose conditioning, you could tell, is on point. Everything's to the T. And that's something that you have against all of your opponents. And it's interesting to think that you're only cutting. Do you find that's where your cardio comes from? That you're not killing yourself or draining yourself and you're able to push that pace?
Yeah, well, I find because of the constant maintaining of holding that base in the gym all the time, eating the right stuff. Don't get me wrong, there's times to indulge, times to like have a bit of fun here and there, but I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do anything like that. But when it comes to with the training aspects, I think I just know where my body sits. I know where if I get to, I sit around 62, 63 kilos, that's normal for me. Sometimes if I have a high intake of fluid, I'll maybe get to 64. But in one session, I sweat 2 kilos off like it's nothing. So, and that's not trying either. Like, that's just natural.
Who's managing how to pull you back? Because you seem like the type of athlete that probably needs somebody around him to say, hey, man, you need to take the day off. Or like, bro, you've just did like 5 days in a row. Like, we need to calm down. Is there anyone right now, or is this up to you as well?
Our boxing IQ, everything's on point because we're training day in, day out. He'll pull me up and say, you don't need to do this. Oh, no, have the day off. Don't stress yourself out, because he doesn't have to tell me to train. I always end up pushing myself.
Did you ever hear that story about when Buster Douglas beat Mike Tyson and he was being interviewed and the interviewer asked him about his opinion on one of the biggest upset in boxing history? And Buster goes, my whole camp prepared me to beat Mike. We knew we were going to win. This would have been like 15 years after Buster retired. He says what they didn't prepare me for, though, was how to live like a champion. So my question I like asking fighters is who are on that ascension, do you ever think about, I know it's tough to not stay in that vacuum because you're so laser pinpoint focused, but do you ever think about that broader perspective of what it will feel like to be a world champion, how things will change? You've main evented before. Would that affect you, or do those thoughts cross your mind?
No, they definitely do. And that's just being human. If you're not able to look at the future, how are you meant to, think about what's going on right now as well? Like look at right now compared to what's to come. And when you're able to really take a look back and be like, okay, this is where I want to be, no one ever takes that chance to think about what comes after that. What I tell a lot of people, a lot of younger guys I help out, sometimes if I'm training, I'll talk to them and give them just a little bit of an insight. I'll tell them from how I think and how I operate. It was actually an Arnold quote, it's much harder to stay at the top than it is to get there, So looking at the journey and the climb, yeah, it's hard. But when you accomplish greatness, it's much harder to stay great than it is to, fall back into habits or fall into ways of, I've achieved everything now, so I'm lost. I'm in limbo. What do I do now? All I think about is what the next challenge is going to be after that. And if not, I'm going to work twice as harder to maintain where I am, if not achieve bigger and better things.
You look at your division, if all the boxing nerds like myself out there, we look at 130 pounds, and it's been in the news recently. You got that rematch with O'Shaquie Foster and Conceição, which was kind of like, they weren't really trying to kill. It was a technical kind of tap, jab and move. You got Valdez allegedly fighting Navarrete. You got Kachache. Kachache just beat Warrington. And these are the guys, if people go to your box rec and you see the guys above your name, I'm sure you're going to pay attention to the champions. In a perfect kind of sort of setup with your boxing style, what do you think matches up perfectly for you with any of the champions right now at 130 for you to come out on top? What style?
I personally would love to fight Kakashi. I've been eyeing that for a while because he's been under the radar for ages. And even before the Jamel fight and everything, like I would see him. He fought that Michael Magnesi for the IBO title. and everyone had him out in the brut. Like no one thought anything of him. But I had a weird feeling that he was going to come and show up, and he was going to beat that Italian Michael Magnesi, whatever, for the IBO. And all he did was box a smart fight, and which was not engage and be on the back foot. And unfortunately, that's all Michael knows how to do, is just be on you and press and fight and be there. And Kachachi fought a phenomenal fight. And then my uncle was over in Saudi Arabia when he fought Joe Cordina for the IBF. And Cordina had a pretty hard weight cut, he was saying. But even when having that fight, everyone counted him out for that fight as well. And then he come and shocked everybody beating Joe. And that was a pretty good that fight, him and Joe. Love that fight. But I also would really like the fight. Even I said to Jackson Stanley about the Shoki Foster and
Conceição.
And Conceição. Like I said about that fight, because I was watching that at home when that fight was on. And I had people messaging me saying, who do you think's in front? And I said, I actually think Conceição's in front, only because
really?
I only saw it from one perspective. And if you gave it to Foster, it was because he was boxing smart. He was landing what he wanted to land, and he was boxing beautifully. But I had a weird feeling that they were going to give it to Conceição only because of his pressure.
Aggression.
And he wasn't letting things slide. He just kept throwing punches. So I actually said to Jackson Stanley, and I said to someone else, I said, no, Conceição will win only because of the pressure he's applying. And then, shockingly, he won. And I remember a numerous amount of people messaging me saying, wow, you got it right and stuff. But it was only because of, it all depends on what the judges see. And all I saw from the judges was that they're pulling more on his favour because Foster's not doing enough. But when he did do things, he stole the round, or personally, I think he outboxed him. But that you never know with judges. You never know which perspective they're going to be looking at.
Man, you just taught everybody how your fight IQ is obviously through the roof for you to break it down like that. Because, A, you're right, there isn't a cut and dry judging system when they're trying to score a 10-9. You don't know if a judge likes the aggression. You don't know if the judge likes the defensive mindedness that Foster was going after. He was, in his head, he must have thought because he wasn't getting hurt, he was winning the rounds. But you got Conceição, who's controlling the center, pushing him up, doing everything he wanted with his footwork. He never was forced to angle off. And so that's a very interesting perspective. When you look at this isn't supposed to be controversial. I'd like to ask this question: if you could remove yourself from being in the division and having fought the guy I'm about to ask. But I think one day you might fight Oscar Valdez one day, who's the interim at 130, and the fight he fought against Liam Wilson, which is a common opponent of yours, which I thought you won that fight. I'm not gonna lie, I thought you won that fight 8-1. I think you might have been an 8-1 dog too. And
yeah, I was.
Yeah, I was
that fight as well. So
my question though is, the fight Wilson fought Valdez, that fight how does that make you feel in terms of moving forward with your career when you look at mistakes that were made on Wilson? It doesn't take a boxing savant to watch the Wilson Valdez fight and see the errors Wilson made when he had this fight in his hands, and he totally chose to fight a certain way and engage, and then he got clipped and knocked out. It doesn't take a boxing savant to understand that there were errors made in the approach. Okay.
Yeah. With
your experience and what you look like in that fight and what your goals are, what do you take from that moment, and sort of how would you approach? Because Valdez is going to come to be a slugger. You guys would be like two bulls in the ring.
I think the best thing, I make it my mission to be a masterclass of everything I do. Like with what I bring to the table. I know I'm an explosive puncher. I know my style excessively is an explosive style. But you got to also think, it's all about who's the smartest. At the end of the day, like Valdez is going to come and fight. But looking back on that Wilson fight, Wilson was a bit too much pride, I'd say, to go from outboxing Valdez to I'm going to sit here and I'm going to trade with him. He basically just allowed himself to get into Valdez's game and fight that fight where he was outboxing Valdez at range. He was doing what he needed to do to win against someone like Valdez, but instead wanted to get in there and fight. Now, I know I'm more than tough enough. I know I'm more than strong enough to do the same. but it's also about, if I want to sit there and I do that, I've also got to move. I've got to use my feet. I've got to change my angles. You got to think about where your timing is, where your placement is. I'm not just going to sit there and wail away. You know, like, don't get me wrong, in the atmosphere of the fight and in the heat of the moment, you may do that at time to time, but it is about who's the smartest fighter. And I know what Valdez does really well. I've watched him for years. So it's about taking those assets away and being able to not let him dictate and force a firefight unless I want a firefight.
One of my favorite fights of all time. It was the first Mickey Ward Gotti fight, and I always tell my friends and family, because they hear Ward Gotti, it already has an aura about it, but a lot of people haven't seen the first fight, and in the first 3 rounds, I always tell people, Arturo is boxing beautifully, guard up, footwork gorgeous, everything is gorgeous, and at the end of the 3rd round, he gets caught, and he couldn't get past his ego, and then you hear his corner from the 4th, box Arturo, box, stop slugging, box, and he was just like, how do you control that? Because it's in you. How do you tame that when everything's chaotic?
I think it's personally being able to separate you from that pride and that ego. You know, at the end of the day, boxing is a sport, boxing's its own entity, but you as an individual, it's about how you handle situations like that and then how you progress from the situations like that, where, you know, a smart fighter is either going to engage to what seems fit, but then also use what they've planned in the gym. A great example was, what's his name? Pitbull Cruz and
Rayo. Valenzuela.
All he did was stick to his plan the entire fight. He did not get sucked in. He did not let Cruz do what he wanted to do and have him there. And he showed Cruz was actually quite one-dimensional.
He was with Garcia. That's coaching and discipline right there.
Yeah, you know, but like that, it just shows, you know, like from someone who's one-dimensional, he utilized his faults and what he does and used it against him.
Do you train for those moments of needing to kind of like, you know, pull back when you might be putting your own legacy or your own career trajectory at risk? Because I felt, to put a period on the original question, I felt that's what Liam did a bit. I felt that he kind of like, I don't want to say self-sabotage his career trajectory by making that choice, but his ego, you knew he thought he was going to knock Valdez out. He didn't do it to get finished. And it's almost like, how is it about the team around you? Is it about the moment? Do you guys train for that?
Like, it could be many things. It's all about, you know, like with personal influence and then other influences around you, you know, like whether it's your team, whether it's mindset, it could be anything. There's a lot of factors in play that could be there, but I'm grateful that I keep my head to the ground, and I hold myself accountable mostly, and then I also have someone like my coach. I've got my family. I've got people around me that also hold me in that point as well, because there is a life outside of boxing as well. So, you know, the legacy you leave behind, whether it be wars or be boxing ability, be everything, you got to be able to bring everything to the table, not just one dimension of one thing. And yeah, I personally believe a bit of self-sabotage on toughness, on, okay, well, I can sit here and I can do what you do better. And don't get me wrong, there's people who have done that in fights and gotten away with it. But you've also got to know you got to back yourself 100%. But then you also got to know that, okay, if I'm getting off second hand here, I'm actually getting hurt. I've got to reel myself back. And that's not showing, I'm weak. It's being smart. And it's also showing that, okay, I can't do this. So how am I going to adapt in this fight to be able to get the win?
Are you a type of guy that is a student? You seem like a student of the game for sure, but are there guys who are currently fighting that you watch?
Fighting that I love to watch. I'm a big fan of Vasyl Lomachenko. Love Lomachenko. I love Crawford. Crawford's a great fighter. I think I'm very much old school, you know, like I love all the current fighters. I think that they're all very relevant and they all have a place. But I'm a very big old school fan, you know, like I've said time and time again, my favorite fighters, if I had to have a 50-50 choice, it'd be Sugar Ray Leonard and Roberto Duran.
Okay, so that era, do you know who Homicide Henry Armstrong was?
Yes.
Homicide Hank, one of my favorite boxing nicknames of all time. Henry Armstrong, one of the greatest. He was in the era, I think, in the 40s and 50s. But the Four King era, you know, Duran, you know, Sugar Ray Leonard, Tommy Hearns, Hagler. My hometown, I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, And one of our first world champions was Ray Boom Boom Mancini. And you ever see any? Come on, mate. Come on, Ray Mancini. Alexis Arguello, when he fought Arguello. One of his
daughter, she's actually named after him.
I know time's limited. I only got 2 more questions. If you had to explain to somebody who's never seen the sport before about what you look like doing your craft, how would you explain what you do?
Beautiful.
Nice, man. Do you got any fight news coming up?
From what I know, like I think we're looking at December, sometime December, whether it be back in New Zealand or I'm not too sure. From what I know at this stage, it's definitely December to finish the year off, and then I'll be training all through Christmas and New Year's time and everything. That's just how I operate. And then I think possibly end of January into Feb, or maybe February will be the one after that. But at this stage, it's just December.
And for everyone out there who wants to follow you, where can people stay connected with you and follow your journey at?
Instagram and Facebook. So you can follow me on Instagram at Action Jackson England, and then the same for Facebook as well.